Are you ready to make a beekeeping calendar with me? My name is Larissa. This channel is called Beekeeping Made Simple, and I'm always trying to find ways to simplify the process of beekeeping so you actually understand what you physically need to do and when to do it so you can help your bees thrive and survive. Now, like I said, there's the tasks that the beekeeper does, and it's not always the confusing part of beekeeping isn't what we need to do, but when we need to do it. And this is what we are going to figure out together in this video. We are going to make this calendar, and there are 2 downloads for you in the description of this video. One is a generic calendar that you can download in PDF format, and the other one is a Microsoft Word document that you can edit if you like. Here in this video, I am going to be drawing it out with a pen and paper because that's kind of how I prefer to do things, but it's always nice to just scan it in or make a photocopy and blow it up a little bit larger, hang it up in your office or something so that you can refer back to it. But the big part of this is to help us be prepared for what we need to do so that we are not scrambling to fix problems in the hive, but we are preventing problems before they occur. Now, we can't prevent everything bad from ever happening. This is nature, and we are not perfect, and nature is not perfect. But there are a lot of things that we can avoid. So, in this calendar, we are going to be writing down what the bees are doing, what the tasks the beekeeper is going to be doing in relation to this, as well as we can also write at the bottom or on another page things you are seeing within your climate, such as what flowers are blooming, what we call nectar flows, and when there's no flowers blooming, which will give you an indication of robbing seasons, as well as tell you maybe what kind of flowers to plant so that you can fill in those gaps when there isn't food for the bees and help them out a little bit more. And you know, if you're really into your bees, this calendar might help you decide when you should be taking your vacations, because when it's really busy in your beekeeping tasks, that's not really a good time to go away for 2 weeks. All right, so let's get started. So first we're going to do just get a straight edge. So you can do a straight line. And we're going to do our middle point and the end point. January and December. Then we'll do 1 center point from there and 1 center point in there. So each one of these blocks now is going to represent a 3-month increment. So you have January, February, and March are going to be right here. And this is going to be January, this will be February, and this will be March. 2 more lines. April, May, June. Actually, I'm going to delete this. March should really be like here. July, August, September, October, November, December. The first part we're going to talk about is how to notice the growth season. The growth is when your hive is small and the population is low. The queen is probably laying, but not a lot. And this is going to be the period in which they start to forage. The bees are starting to leave the hive. There's not a lot of food for them to gather, but they are beginning to bring some in. The beekeeper is often feeding at this time, and the bees are starting to build comb. The queen is laying, but everything is small and increasing. So an easy way to know when growth starts, or this growth season starts, is to know when it's time to pick up your bees. That package or nuke, when was that ready for pickup? And if you haven't picked up bees yet, ask around when you put in your order, when is the pickup? So for me, pickup, I had two options. I could have picked up my package mid-March or end of March. This year, everything was delayed and I actually didn't get it till April 20th. But that was not a normal thing. And usually you want to go by the normal schedule, not what was, they had to delay this year. Now, growth is usually early spring to mid-spring, very end of winter to mid-spring. But I don't want you to get stuck on, spring means growth, and so that's mid-March to end of June, because it can really vary. Now in Hawaii, it was never cold enough for there to be a frost. It was never, getting below 50s, maybe 40s at nighttime. But there was still a period of growth because October, November, December, January, there was very little going on with the hives. The population would get very low. And the queen never stopped laying, but sometimes they would even kick the drones out at this time. And there were no supers on the hive. That's what you need to see is, when is it time for flowers to start blooming, but in small quantities? When is it time to pick up your package or nuke? And that's going to really be the start of the growth. Now, it is okay if you are off a little bit with this. This is going to change a little bit, and we're going to continue to edit this over the course of years as a beekeeper. Right in the middle of the chart, I put in the middle of March, which is kind of the start of the growth period here. If you're picking up a nuke locally, then the growth period started weeks before because the bees started growing a while ago. But you really, the best way to know when growth is to see when packages are ready for pickup locally. So those packages are coming from southern, warmer states, but they don't bring them up until it is an acceptable weather and enough for them to forage where you are. So below that, we're going to put underneath the chart, but directly below where the line is for the start of growth, we're going to write some of the tasks of the beekeeper. What are some tasks that we do as our hive is beginning to grow? Well, we are going to make sure that they have the proper space. This might be, if you are picking up a nuke or a package, it might be adding another box on top. If your hive overwintered, it might be opening it up and taking a box off. If it is exceptionally cold out, like it was this year, it might be putting a follower board inside your box so the bees are contained within a 5-frame section instead of having the entire 10 frames of the box to keep warm during that cold spell. So one of the tasks is ensuring that the bees have enough space to grow, but not too much space if it is cold out. The other task of the beekeeper is to make sure that they are not starving. It is a common thing when bees overwinter that in this late winter, early spring phase, when it starts to warm up and the bees aren't clustered up so much, that they starve. So we want to ensure that they have feed. By the time it is warm enough that the bees can almost daily be leaving the hive, that is when liquid feed can be put on the hive. This is in a ratio of 1 part sugar to 1 part water. And then the final task is treating. You do not always have to treat in the springtime. It is one of those things that you can as a precaution, or if you got your bees from somewhere else and they did not treat, you can. The packages I got, they said that they were treated before I purchased them. So there's no need to overexpose your bees to treatments, whether organic or inorganic. But if it was your bees that overwintered, and say this is just your 2nd year, and you have no definitive proof that your bees don't need treatment, this would be a good time to treat. This treatment, a lot of these treatments need to be in the hive for 6 weeks. So when we write down these beekeeping tasks, treating is better to be done earlier in the springtime when it's warm enough to open the hive, but not incredibly warm because the brood population is lower and there's no chance of you tainting your honey as it would be if you waited until May to put this treatment in. When choosing a treatment, choose something that does not have a strong smell, like Apogard and formic acid, because those can really disrupt the queen's pheromones and can slow down the growth of the hive. Now next we're going to talk about just what's going on in the environment, if you know, because it's helpful to know what exactly you're expecting. If you want to, you can write down temperature ranges, or you can make a note as to when the temperature was warm enough for you to start opening the hives so that you have a general idea next year if you like. But I'm going to write down that I saw a little bit of clover and that we had a few daffodils, because that's really all I saw in terms of food for the bees to forage in my specific neighborhood. So I'm really going to want to plant some stuff that are early spring blooming for next year so that they have a little bit more to forage. Now in the late spring and early summer is when I normally see the massive growth. So although you have your growth, it is a steady incline until you hit massive growth time. And honestly, you might want to not plan a vacation or anything about big around this time. So for those of you that aren't in my area, what we're describing as massive growth is when the bees start bringing in lots of honey. This is going to be the start of the nectar flow. This is going to be the start of seeing queen cells week after week. This is going to be not only the start of the nectar flow, but swarm season. So if you are hearing local beekeepers talk about swarming, whenever you started to see those first queen cells in your hive, this is what we're going to write down as the start of the massive growth swarm season. Now, bees can swarm early in the spring if they don't have enough room. But if you are saying, I had room in my brood box, I don't know what the deal is, or week after week you are seeing queen cells, that's when you are going to say that is the start of the massive growth / swarm season. So when I think back to this, which was only like a month ago, I believe one of my hives swarmed just 2 weeks ago. And so that was, I believe, the tail end of swarm season. 2 weeks ago was early mid-June. So I'm going to write a little tick mark here in the mid-June section. I'm going to say the start of my swarm season was probably mid-May. And I'm going to put another mark there. And this is going to be the real, you can get a red marker if you like, make this the hot zone. If you're not totally sure when that season started, I mean, this is really one of the best tips I think any beekeeper can give a beginner. It's always better to plan too early to do something than to do something too late. So, if you're not sure when swarm season started, plan for it to start 2 weeks before you think it started. That's always better than too late. And it's good to know this because even if you have ample space in your brood boxes, once that massive growth season starts and the bees just want to swarm, and it can be hard to get this out of their brain that they want to swarm without actually splitting them and physically moving their queen into another set of boxes. You want ample space on top of the hive for their honey, as well as space within the brood for those nurse bees. Without that, the beehive becomes off balance and the foragers are struggling to find somewhere to put their food, and they are putting it into the brood section. And when the hive is off balance like that, that's when the swarming process starts. I put an empty honey super on my hive. It had just one frame of honey from April all the way into May. And then all of a sudden, end of May came, stuff started blooming. I put a honey super on the hive, and 10 days later, it was almost full. Almost full. That is a lot of honey for one hive to bring in when they struggled to bring in or just didn't bring in really any honey for the first 6 weeks or so. And this comes on very fast because it is a very quick switch from there just being buds on this nectar flow, whatever plant's going to be blooming, to the flowers being out. And that high population, all those babies that queen was laying eggs for, are now going to be adults, and they are going to have lots of bees ready and waiting to go forage. Now, also talking to other local beekeepers, because we are just first basing this off of our first year, and year to year it changes, and we haven't gone through our whole year. So it's really important to also talk to other beekeepers and get information from them as well. Now, when I purchased my package of bees, I asked the guy, were they treated? And he said yes, they were treated before he purchased them or picked them up from the beekeeper in Georgia with Apivar. And he also said treat them again in July/August, and then treat them again September/October. So that was another little bit of information I'm going to write down on another piece of paper because I want to hold on to all of this. So this beekeeper is saying to treat, in the springtime, which they did for me, and to also treat again in July, which is done after your honey harvest. So that also it gives me a hint as to when honey harvesting is done. It's going to be done in July, according to him, and then I'm going to treat, so probably more like early mid-July. And he also says to treat September, October. So that's one beekeeper giving me some important pieces of information. And, this isn't a beekeeper I know. I just sent him an email, and that's what he told me. But also, I joined a bee club, and I found out from a few beekeepers that very few of them treat in the springtime. They all treat in the late summer and fall. So that's another thing I'm keeping in mind, that it might not be necessary to treat in the spring. Now, I know there seems to be common, a lot of people stray away from joining bee clubs. Maybe there's none nearby or whatever, and so they don't join one. Now, I think this is a huge mistake. It doesn't matter if the clubs are too far away from you or if there's no club in your state. Find a beekeeping association that is in your climate zone. If you are in Idaho and there are no bee associations for hours away from you, okay, then you are not going to be going to in-person meetings, and that is fine. But if there is a club that is in a state that's next to you, maybe there's one in Utah, even in Colorado, it's not a big deal if it's not close by. But if you are in an area and say your cold winters is a concern of yours, joining a club with equally cold winters or even a little bit colder than yours would be beneficial. Now, when you go to these clubs' websites, find out what members get. Most club memberships are under $50 for the year. The one I joined is $35 for the year. So these things are not like a waste of money. They are very affordable, and you just find a club. If you cannot go to in-person events, Email them if it doesn't say it on the website. If you can't tell from the website, many club websites have a forum. Once you are a member, you can post questions to the forum and other members can answer you. That can be invaluable information. There are so many different questions you can ask to the forum, and the club I belong to also has Zoom meetings. So every in-person meeting, you can also log in via Zoom, and a lot of clubs have that as well. They also have Facebook pages. Now, I don't care if you like Facebook or not, it is also a tool. So you can still make an account, can be under a fake name. You can use an email just for Facebook if you like, but you can still use your membership to log in to join their Facebook group, and it can be another place to ask questions. Now, there are also other beekeeping forums, and I have them listed down in the video description. And of course, there are YouTube channels. There are YouTubers that are from all over the world. Just get a feel for when they are saying that they do these things and keep it in mind. So if there is a YouTuber that has bees in Tennessee, and come March, they're already posting videos of them splitting hives, that's good to know. Another YouTuber is in Michigan and he is preparing his hive for winter come September. Keep that in mind. Maybe you're not in Michigan, but if you were a little bit south of that, then you know that you're not going to be preparing your hive for winter before them. These are all just little pieces of information to help guide you while you are making this calendar. And on top of that, you have my live chats. When I say thanks for everyone for joining, please leave in the comments where you are located. Look to see where other people are tuning in from and leave them a comment to say, hey, so-and-so, I see you are also in Connecticut, and ask them a question. They might not have correct information, but if you start getting the same answer over and over again from different people in Connecticut, then that's starting to let you know that you are seeing a trend among beekeepers and one that you might want to keep in mind. Another way to tell when this massive growth swarm season is to look at your inspection sheets. I have an inspection sheet you can download in the video description, and in that sheet you should be writing down how many frames of honey you see. Now, you don't have to look at every single frame, especially if you have honey supers on. You can just kind of peer down into the box and get a general idea of how many frames are full and how many empty frames you have. But week after week, you look at this and you see how your hive had just one frame of honey in April and May, and then all of a sudden there was 3 frames of honey and 6 frames of honey, and the amount of honey increased. Now, when I'm looking at my inspection sheets, I see that I wrote down package received April 19th, first inspection May 7th. There is 3/4 of a frame of honey as of that inspection. And then I see that on 5/18 I inspected again 11 days later, and there was a 1/4 frame, a 1/4 frame, a half, and a 1/3 of a frame. So really, add that up to maybe about a full frame of honey. So it went from 3/4 of a frame of honey to a little over a frame of honey. The other hives had not even 1 full frame of honey. Those were nukes, and when I got the nuke, they were 5 frames of brood and no honey on them. 5/18, there was not even 1 full frame of honey in the hives that were nukes. And then, let's see, May 18th, there was 1.5 frames of honey. And then May 19th, I checked the other hive and there were 3 frames of honey. So you see that this is very slowly growing week to week. Less than a frame of honey, a little over a frame of honey, 1 frame of honey, 2 frames of honey. And then June 11th comes, and I don't even write down how many frames of honey, but I have lots of stars next to things. Queen cells everywhere, exclamation point, is what I have written in there, but room and brood box. So when I look at my notes, I see that the bees very slowly grew from almost a frame of honey, a little over a frame of honey, 1 frame, 2 frame every 7 to 10 days. And then all of a sudden, early June came and I was immediately in the red zone and there were capped queen cells. So I'm going to say that my swarm season started probably end of May, early June. And next year it might even start sooner because this year we got a late start and I got my bees 3 weeks later than I was scheduled to. And so as the beekeeper tasks come swarm season and major growth, I'm going to write down major growth over my red. The tasks, no treating should be done this time of year, but you can do a mite test. If your population is high enough and you're comfortable spotting your queen, you are going to want to add boxes to brood and honey supers. Feeding is over, and this is when we split. Also, I am going to put in my environment mid-June, high heat. And I'm also going to put down in my beekeeper's tasks water source for the spring and summer. The next part is honey season. And so this is going to overlap with your growth, but it should also go past the growth slash big swarm season that you have. For me, I would say that this was early June. June 11th inspection was when there was quite a bit of honey coming in. So I'm going to put a line and the word honey right at the early June period. And I'm going to extend it to mid-July. And that's going to be a guess of mine that I'll change later on if I find that it goes a little bit later. But I have from that beekeeper I bought my packages from to treat in July. So if you're treating in July, that means you already harvested honey. You don't treat with your honey supers on unless you absolutely have to. I really don't know what's blooming in this area. All I pretty much see is clover. So we'll see when this honey season ends. But again, asking beekeepers in your area, walking around and seeing what flowers are blooming and looking up when that bloom season is will give you a good indicator as to when that nectar season ends and when it's good to harvest your honey. So when that honey season ends is when you're going to put a line for honey harvesting. I'm going to put honey harvest and question mark. And when you are checking your hives, what you're going to do is fill out your inspection sheet and write down how many frames of honey are on there. And you are going to see your hive grow, just like I did in my inspections. From 1 frame, 3 frames, 8 frames, to expanding quite a bit, and then for it to just kind of stop. And that is when the nectar flow has ended. There might be another one that starts up again in a little bit, but for those of you with a cold climate, most likely that later flow is not going to be something you're going to harvest from. That's going to be left for the bees, and you are going to harvest at the end of this flow. So under here, in July, I'm going to write a note underneath my calendar, and in my tasks section, I'm going to put harvest. This is also when you want to treat. So after you are done harvesting, you are also going to put treat varroa. Now, that beekeeper said that I should treat again in September, October, come the fall. But let's see, the other thing you are going to want to keep in mind is the fact that your population is going to start to decrease once this ends. So I'm going to put a box here in pencil because I'm not positive when this is going to be, but I'm just going to take a little bit of a guess. And right where my line is for treating for varroa and harvesting honey, I'm going to draw a box all the way down to December, to the very end of my calendar. And I'm going to put population decreases. This is in pencil, just in case I want to shorten it. But the queen is going to stop laying at some point within this box, and she's not going to start laying again until the next year, come January, mid-January at the earliest. And so this whole area is going to be population decreases. For those of you in warmer climates, it is possible that you are going to have another honey harvest. Just like in Hawaii, we had one in the early spring / midwinter. We had another one in June of the lehua, and then we had the Christmas berry, which was a really big harvest in like the late summer. And that was the end of our harvesting, say like September, and that was when you can treat if you want to, not necessary though, and the population doesn't start increasing again until January, just like it does here in Pennsylvania. So in Hawaii, I would put population decreases. I would start that probably mid-September or October, whenever the Christmas berry ended. But here in PA, I'm going to start the population decreasing come mid-July, tentatively in pencil. So for tasks, not only are we going to be harvesting if we think we can and we have enough honey, we're going to be treating. Now you're going to want to treat one final time, and that is going to be in the fall, before it is too cold to open your hive, and right before you prepare it for winter. So last year it was Halloween and it was 80 degrees and beautiful, but it got very cold very fast right after that. So I am going to say, as a precaution, I'm going to want to be prepared to put in a treatment. Actually, this is the best time to use oxalic acid. So to use oxalic acid, I have a vaporizer at this time of year. If you want to use the strips, then you're going to want to put them in sooner, because they are in for 6 weeks. So I'm going to put another block across the entire month of October for varroa mites. If it is getting below 65 degrees Fahrenheit out in October, if it is often very cold out for trick-or-treaters to be walking around without a jacket, then plan to do this in September. You can always do it a little bit later once you already have this sitting out and you see what the weather is going to be like. But you don't want to be scrambling to find some of these treatments in a rush, because some of the Viroxan strips were sold out when I was looking for them in the springtime. If you wanted the smaller packages, they were just selling those like 80 strip packages that were incredibly expensive and more than what most backyard beekeepers need. So we have our 3 varroas, the varroa mite treatments listed in there. If you are in a warm climate year-round, what I did was only treated once a year. I didn't have to worry about my winter bees being, treatment mite-free, because I don't even know if they should technically laid eggs for winter bees, since there was no winter time. What I did was I treated in December into mid-January, so that they had low mite levels before the honey season started. And that's what I recommend to you, to treat before your honey season starts. So if your honey season starts in February, do the treatment, mid-December through January. If your mite levels are really high come the end of your honey season, then you can also put in another treatment as soon as you're done harvesting. This end of July, August season, although you're not only going to be looking at when your honey flow ends, and your bees are bringing in less honey and treating, but you also want to keep an eye out for robbing. Now you want to keep an eye out for robbing year round, and signs for that are your hives getting aggressive, you're seeing bees try to sting each other on the bottom board or on the lid, you're seeing a lot of dead bees outside the entrance, your hives are, kind of agitated when you open them up. But this often happens when it gets really hot and dry out towards the end of the year. The populations in the beehives are still very high, and there's just not a lot of food for them to gather. The flowers that were blooming come summer are dying off, and the lack of rain, it's just, everyone gets a little cranky, not just the bees. So you especially want to put down in the beekeeping tasks for mid-July through to August is to keep an eye on robbing. If it is not too hot out, reducing the entrance might be something that you want to do. You also want to just write down environment and write down what flowers you see blooming at that time of year, so that you have an idea of whether your bees are starving or not. Since it also is a very hot time of year, you still want to make sure that they have water. And in those really high temperatures, when it's in the high 90s and over 100, you want to make sure that the entrance reducers are off unless you really think that there's robbing going on. And I like to put an upper entrance in my honey super. So I just drill a 3/4 inch hole into my uppermost box, and that gives the bees another entrance to use, especially the foragers that are coming back, because there can be a lot of bees at the lower entrance flapping their wings, and this is to help them circulate the air. So then the foragers can go through the upper entrance. You can also add additional box on top so that you have somewhere for that hot air to go, and so that the population doesn't have to just beard all over the outside of the hive, because the bees want to free up space around the brood frames so that they can circulate the air and cool it down. So it is very common to see bearding when it gets hot out and when the population is still high. Giving an upper entrance, or even just putting really thin pieces of wood, or even like a couple of quarters under the lid or under the inner cover, just to elevate it a little bit up off the hive, can be helpful for the bees to circulate air and to get some of that hot air out. The late summer can also be more of an issue for small hive beetles. So if you are in an area that is warm year-round, your hive beetles will be a problem year-round. But as the population in the hive decreases and there's a lot of honey in the hive, that is when you really want to keep an eye on your small hive beetle population. It's okay if you see 1 or 2 walking around in the hive, especially if they're under the lid or on the bottom board, but you do not want them walking around on the frames. And so traps under the lid and traps on the bottom board, or those screened bottoms with oil pan, are really great ways to make sure your small hive beetle population is down. So we're also going to put for the tasks for the late summer, small hive beetles. But for some people, you might be putting that starting in the springtime, or at the very start of your growth, or earlier in the year. But as of right now, I have only seen 1 or 2 max in each of my hives. Now come to fall, while we're in this population decrease, I'm not totally sure when the queen stops laying. So I'm just going to put here at the end of January a line, and then I'm going to put queen starts laying. Now the only question I still have that I haven't put in this calendar and I'm not sure about is when to close up the hive for winter. I am thinking that it's going to be at the very end of October to mid-November. So that's, well, I'm going to put a line right there, and I'm going to put close for winter right at the end of my row on my box. But that's just going to be something where I'm going to have to keep an eye out for and look to the weather. You don't want to do this once it is you know, so cold out that the bees are going to be clustering up, which that loose cluster can start as warm as 65 Fahrenheit. And of course, if it's windy out and cloudy, that's going to make it seem even colder. It's always better to close the hive up for winter earlier than it is later. So for fall, you know, come mid-September, my tasks are going to be to treat. I'm going to add in a task for my summertime, my late summer, to test for mites, because that should be done at least every other month, and especially to make sure your treatments are working. But come fall, I'm also going to have the task to treat. I'm going to have to close for winter. And in my population decrease space, I am also going to put around the October section, queen stops laying, ? And don't want to ignore wintertime too much. There's not a ton to do, but one thing you're going to want to add in the task section for wintertime, while your hive may either have no brood present or the queen is just starting to lay, is to feed. And in the warmer climates, you want to check to make sure they're not starving, because you don't want to leave too much honey on the hive. The population is low, because small hive beetle and wax moth can start to take over. But you're going to want to check in on them and make sure that they now aren't starving because you took too much from them. I've always had a chest freezer, even since I lived in a studio apartment that had a mini fridge and a hot plate as its kitchen. I still had just a small 3 cubic foot chest freezer, because it was easy to just stand up frames inside there and to feed them back to the bees when they needed to. It was a savior in preventing small hive beetle infestations, and a great way to freeze your frames and your honeycomb before giving it back to the bees, so that you make sure you are not putting a wax moth or small hive beetle infestation inside your hive. Then we're going to add in some colored backgrounds just to help you remember the different tasks depending on the seasons. The first one, which is maybe one of the easier ones, is the yellow for the center, and that is going to symbolize what we're going to call summer, which is lots of flowers blooming and the hive is at its greatest population, and ends when the population starts to decrease and when you would be harvesting the honey. Another easy one to color in would be the winter time. This is going to be when the hive is too cold to open up. It would start when you close your hive up for the winter, and will start up again when your hive is starting to grow again, when you would be picking up your package of bees. So it ends right where the growth is and starts right when you would be closing your hive up for winter. And let's fill in the 2 missing spots. I'm going to put a pink in for what we call spring, and spring is what I describe as growth. So the start of when those packages can be bought. Bees are starting to forage, honeycomb is being built, stuff is starting to grow. And then I'm going to put a green in for what we're going to describe as fall. And fall is the end of the growth season, but not quite winter. The hive is decreasing, but the queen is still laying. And so that is my calendar. Now for you, don't forget we have the 2 downloads, but what I really need you to do is to add in any information you can about your climate zone in the comments, because that is how we can all help each other. Even if you are in your first year as a beekeeper, any and all of this information can be helpful to other beekeepers, because the more bits of information they have, the greater chance they have of figuring out what they need to put on their calendar. Thanks for watching this video. I really appreciate your support. Tune in every Saturday for a new video on YouTube. Don't forget to check out my website, beekeepingmadesimple.com, has lots of free downloads and information on my blog, as well as information on how to sign up for my online beekeeping course.